Thanksgiving morning. I woke up to silence. No smell of coffee, no sound of cartoons from the living room. Just quiet. Too quiet. I called out, "Natalie?" No answer. "Ethan? Sophie?" Nothing. The air felt wrong. Cold. Still. I walked into the kitchen. The counter was spotless, except for one thing. A note, folded once. I picked it up. My daughter's handwriting. "We decided to spend Thanksgiving in Hawaii." I read it twice, then again. We decided. Not, we asked. Not, "Mom, would you like to come?" Just, we decided. I stood there for a long minute. Then I said out loud, calm and steady. I didn't cry. I just made tea. The kettle hissed. The house didn't answer. I poured the water, sat down, and read the note one more time while the steam curled between my hands. I remember the sound of the clock. Tick, tick, tick. Every second a reminder that they were gone, and I didn't even know when they left. I looked at the photos on the wall. Natalie at her wedding. Ethan smiling like he owned the world. Sophie with her missing tooth. All of them framed in gold, lined up like proof that we were once a family. Now it just looked like decoration in a stranger's house. Last night, Natalie had kissed my cheek before going to bed. "Good night, Mom. Tomorrow we'll all cook together, okay?" I smiled back. "Of course." That was 12 hours ago. The refrigerator hummed. The coffee pot was empty. Their suitcases were gone. Only my cup, my robe, and that note. I took a sip of tea. Warm, simple, safe. That's all I needed right now. Something that didn't lie. I walked through the hallway. Sophie's pink jacket still hung on the chair. One shoe by the stairs. I picked it up and placed it neatly by the door. "She'll need it when she comes home," I said quietly, though I didn't believe it. The phone buzzed. A message from my bank. Hawaiian Airlines, payment confirmed. So that's where my daughter's Thanksgiving went. I sat down again. The note was still there next to my cup. I picked up a pen and wrote on the bottom of it, "Enjoy." Then I folded it and placed it back where I found it. I didn't feel anger. Not yet. Just a cold kind of clarity. They'd taken me in after Neil died. "Move in with us, Mom," Natalie had said. "You shouldn't be alone." So I did. I helped with Sophie, paid a few bills, bought groceries. It felt good to be useful. Until I realized I was doing everything and no one noticed. Maybe this was my mistake, believing that love was service, that silence meant peace. I looked around the kitchen again. Every item had a story. The toaster, I bought it. The dining table, I paid for it. Even the curtains, my choice, my money. I hadn't realized how much of myself I had placed into this house until it stood empty. The tea had gone cold. I poured it down the sink and washed the cup. I didn't like leaving things dirty, even when no one cared. The sunlight through the window made everything too bright, almost harsh. Outside, neighbors carried pies, hugged family, called out greetings. I stood there behind the glass, invisible. A thought slipped in. Maybe being invisible isn't the worst thing. At least invisible people can see clearly. I walked back to the table. The note was still there. I placed my hand on it, pressed it flat, then whispered, "So this is what you decided?" In my head, I replayed Natalie's voice from last week. "Ethan says we might travel soon, Mom. You'll be okay here, right?" I had smiled. "I'll be fine." I didn't ask where. I didn't ask when. I trusted her. Now I knew better. I poured another cup of tea, sat down again, and opened my small notebook. November 23rd, Thanksgiving. They left. I didn't cry. I just made tea. That was all I wrote. No long sentences, no emotions, just facts. The wind knocked softly on the window. I didn't move. Around noon, I heard a car engine in the distance, probably a delivery truck. Then the doorbell rang. I opened it. A man stood there holding a bouquet. Happy Thanksgiving, Mrs. Langley, from Natalie and Ethan. I stared at the flowers, red and yellow, bright, too bright. He smiled awkwardly. Should I put them in water for you? No, I said quietly. I'll handle it. He nodded and left. I closed the door and looked at the card attached to the bouquet. With love. I laughed once, short and sharp. With love. I placed the flowers in the trash, still wrapped in plastic. I didn't want their apology sitting on my table. For a moment I just stood there, hands flat on the counter. The same counter where I had cooked Thanksgiving meals for decades. Where I had rolled dough with Natalie when she was little. Where Neil used to steal spoonfuls of pie filling when he thought I wasn't watching. Now it was just cold stone under my palms. I took a deep breath. The air smelled like nothing. Maybe that was better than the smell of betrayal. I folded the note one last time and slid it under the sugar jar. Stay there, I said softly. You belong here more than they do. I turned off the lights, locked the doors, and went to the living room. The quiet followed me. It wasn't heavy anymore, just clear. I sat down on the couch, pulled a blanket over my legs, and stared at the clock. Tick, tick, tick. They were somewhere warm, probably laughing. I was here, alone, but I still had my peace. That night, before going to bed, I walked back into the kitchen. The note hadn't moved. Neither had I. I whispered to the dark, "Tomorrow I'll start something new." Then I smiled. I didn't cry. I just made tea. When your father died, move in with us, Mom. You'll never be alone again. That's what Natalie said 2 years ago. I believed her. I packed my things. 3 boxes, 1 suitcase, and a folder of bills Neil had kept organized before he passed. When I arrived, they smiled. Make yourself at home. So I did. I cooked, cleaned, picked Sophie up from school. I paid the electricity once, then twice, then every month after that. No one said thank you, but they always said, "You're amazing, Mom." At first it felt nice. Family, warm dinners, laughter. Then the dinners stopped being family dinners. Ethan came home late. Natalie started scrolling on her phone while I served the food. Sophie said once, "Mom says you love chores." I laughed softly. Did she? That night, I stayed up a little longer than usual, staring at the kitchen lights. One day, Ethan handed me a list. "Groceries," he said. I looked at it. Wine, snacks, steaks. "Got it," I said. I used my own card. A week later, another list. Then another. Somehow, helping became responsible for everything. I didn't complain. That's what mothers do, right? We help. We fill the silence. But one night I walked past their room. Ethan was on the phone. His voice was low, almost a whisper. "She's harmless," he said. "It's her money, not her." I stopped breathing. He laughed quietly, then added, "As long as she's here, we're fine." I stood there in the dark hallway, staring at the wall. It wasn't the words that hurt. It was how calm he sounded, like I wasn't a person, just a line in his budget. I didn't go back to bed. I sat in the kitchen until sunrise, the same table where I used to help Natalie with her homework. When the light came in, I opened my notebook. Date, February 16th. Note, enough. That was all I wrote. I didn't tell Natalie what I heard. I wanted to see if she'd tell me herself. For days, nothing changed. She smiled, kissed my cheek, said, "Can you pick up Sophie? I'm busy." I did. She said, "Can you cover the internet bill this month? Ethan's bonus is late." I did. I didn't ask for it back. One morning, I overheard her talking to her friend on the phone. "She's fine. She likes helping." The friend laughed through the speaker. Natalie said, "Well, she should. She owes me for taking her in." I turned off the faucet. The water stopped midstream. Owes her. For what, exactly? That afternoon, I drove to the park. I sat on a bench with a cup of coffee that I didn't finish. A little boy ran by, laughing. His mother chased him, smiling. I watched them until the air got cold. Then I went home. At dinner, Ethan looked at the mail on the table. "Property tax bill," he said. "Can you handle it, Nora?" I looked at him. "Sure." He smiled. "You're a lifesaver." I nodded. I didn't say that my name was on that envelope, not his. That night, I opened the drawer and found Neil's old binder. Receipts, bills, records. I added the new ones inside, one by one: grocery store, electric company, property tax, my signature on every page. I sat back and whispered, "Her money, not her." And it echoed differently now, colder, sharper. He was right. It was my money. But it was also my house, my time, my years. I closed the binder and put it in the cabinet under the sink. That's where I kept the tea, too. It made sense. Both things that kept me alive. Days went by. I stopped waiting for thank yous. I just did what needed to be done. Quietly. When they laughed, I smiled. When they argued, I stayed silent. But inside, I was collecting. Every word, every bill, every reminder that I didn't belong here anymore. One evening, Natalie knocked on my door. "Mom, could you watch Sophie again this weekend? We're going out." I looked at her face. She didn't even pretend to ask kindly. "Of course," I said. After she left, I wrote in my notebook again. "Weekend. Take care of Sophie. Monday. Call bank." It wasn't revenge. It was preparation. On Sunday night, Sophie asked, "Grandma, are you happy here?" I smiled. "I'm always happy when I'm with you." She hugged me. "Mom says you're lucky we let you stay." I froze for half a second. "Is that what she said?" Sophie nodded. "She said you'd be sad alone." I brushed her hair back gently. "Don't worry, honey. Grandma's never really alone." After she fell asleep, I went to the kitchen and opened my binder again. The pages were heavy now, proof piled on proof. I didn't know what I was going to do yet, but I knew I wouldn't just sit quietly forever. That night, I stood by the window. Outside, the wind moved the trees. The streetlights flickered. I thought of Neil. He always said, "When people start taking you for granted, make them notice your absence." I smiled a little. Maybe it was time. Before bed, I opened my notebook one last time. Under the word enough, I added, "soon." Then I turned off the light. The house was quiet again, but it wasn't the same kind of quiet. It wasn't loneliness anymore. It was planning. I closed my eyes and whispered to the dark, "You'll see, Ethan. You'll see exactly how much of this house is mine." The next morning, I woke up early. The house was quiet, like it always was lately. I sat at the table with my tea and opened my notebook. Yesterday's line stared back at me. Enough. I meant it. I pulled the old binder from the cabinet under the sink. It was dusty, heavy, and full of papers I had saved without really knowing why. Neil used to joke that I kept every receipt since our wedding day. Maybe he was right. I smiled for a second, then I opened it. The first paper on top was a grocery bill from 2 years ago. My name printed at the bottom, paid with my card. I turned the next page. Electric company, my account number. I turned again. Property tax, my signature. I kept going. Page after page, every receipt had my name. I whispered it out loud, slowly. Every receipt, my name. I got up, walked around the kitchen, and started opening drawers. Coffee maker, my purchase. Dishwasher, my purchase. Washer, dryer, television, mine. Even the car keys hanging by the door, mine too. I didn't realize it before, but everything in this house came from me. Not Natalie, not Ethan, me. The thought made me laugh a little, the quiet kind of laugh that comes from disbelief. I pulled open another drawer, took out the folder with the new bills, and laid them all on the table. I made 3 piles, paid by me, paid by them, shared. The shared pile stayed empty. The truth sat right there, in front of me, printed in black and white. The kettle clicked behind me. I poured another cup of tea, careful, steady. The steam rose, soft and slow. I looked at the table again and said, "Let's see who really owns this house." I took a pen and started marking each paper with a small red dot, one after another. Electricity, Water, internet, insurance, all red, all mine. When I finished, I placed everything inside one thick folder and closed it with a rubber band. My hands didn't shake. My heart didn't race. I just felt calm. Outside, a car pulled into the driveway. Ethan. I watched him from the window as he stepped out, phone pressed to his ear, not even looking toward the house. He smiled at something and got back in the car. Then he left again. No word, no wave. I turned away from the window and looked at the folder on the table. It looked small for what it held. 2 years of proof that I had built everything around them while they treated me like I didn't exist. I took a sticky note and wrote 2 words, all mine. I stuck it on the front cover. The phone rang. Natalie's name on the screen. I let it ring. Then it stopped. A minute later, a message popped up. Mom, can you transfer $300 for Sophie's dance class? Ethan forgot. I stared at the text. Then I slid the phone face down. I didn't answer. Instead, I opened the drawer again and took out a small envelope with my checkbook. I flipped through it. Every check signed with my name, rent, bills, groceries. The ink told its own story. Neil used to say, "Paper doesn't lie." He was right again. I sat down, folded my hands on the table, and said quietly, "Every light in this house is mine." It wasn't anger. It was realization, a shift. That night, when Natalie came home, she called out, "Mom, we're back." I didn't answer. She found me at the table, papers spread everywhere. "What's all this?" she asked, her voice light, pretending confusion. I looked at her and smiled. "Bills." She frowned. "What kind of bills?" I slid the folder toward her. "The kind that keep this house standing." She didn't touch it. "You didn't have to—" "I did," I interrupted, "because no one else did." She tried to laugh it off. "Oh, Mom, don't be dramatic." I said nothing. Ethan walked in, grabbed a beer from the fridge, looked at the papers and said, "What's this about?" "Nothing," I said, "just numbers." He shrugged and walked away. Natalie followed him. When the door closed behind them, I picked up the folder again. It felt heavier this time. I carried it to my room, opened the drawer beside the bed, and slid it inside next to the notebook. The binder, the folder, the notebook, 3 layers of truth, all with my name. Before turning off the light, I whispered, "Her money, not her." Then I smiled. We'll see. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. I sat at the same table, folder in front of me, phone beside it. I typed a number I hadn't used in years, an old contact from when Neil handled the estate paperwork. "Good morning, this is Nora Langley," I said when the voice answered. "I need to update some property records." The man on the line paused. "All right, Mrs. Langley, what's the reason for the update?" "Ownership verification," I said. It was quiet for a moment. Then he replied, "Understood." I hung up, finished my tea, and looked around. The house looked the same, but I didn't see it that way anymore. Every chair, every picture, every shadow belonged to me. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel small. I felt in control. I stood up, closed the blinds, and said to the room, "Let's start counting what's mine." Then I picked up the folder, placed it neatly in my bag, and smiled. They thought I was just the help. They'd forgotten who signed every check, and soon they'd remember. The next day, the house was empty again. Natalie had taken Sophie to school. Ethan was gone. I sat at the kitchen table, the same folder in front of me. The tea was hot, the steam rising in quiet little curls. The note under the sugar jar was still there. I looked at it once, then turned away. It was time. I picked up my phone and searched for a moving company. The first one I called didn't answer. The second did. A man's voice, tired but polite. "Good morning, ma'am. How can I help you?" "I need to schedule a move," I said. "When, ma'am?" "Tomorrow." He paused. "Tomorrow is Thanksgiving." "I know." Another pause. 9 a.m.? "That's fine," I said. "I'll pay extra." The man hesitated. "Are you moving far?" "Just far enough," I said. When the call ended, I set the phone down. The house hummed quietly around me. The refrigerator clicked. The clock ticked. I wrote a short list on a yellow pad. Pack everything that's mine. I went room by room. The guest towels, my dishes, my books, the vase Neil had bought from Savannah, the armchair where I read every night. All mine. I stopped in the hallway and looked at the photo of our wedding day. I touched the glass lightly and whispered, "We built everything from nothing. They won't take that from me." When I came back to the kitchen, the tea had gone cold. I poured it out and made a new cup. I liked the sound of the kettle more than the sound of their voices. It never lied. At noon, Natalie called. I let it ring. Then the message came through. "Mom, can you watch Sophie tonight? We'll be late." I stared at the screen and smiled. "No," I said softly to myself. "Not tonight." I opened a drawer and took out a roll of tape, a pen, and a stack of blank labels. One by one, I started marking boxes: bedroom, kitchen, living room, study, each one filled with pieces of my life that they had mistaken for theirs. When I reached the shelf with Neil's old records, I stopped. I ran my fingers along the covers, dusty but familiar. I picked one, Autumn Leaves. He used to play it every Thanksgiving morning while the turkey roasted. I smiled. "One last time," I said. I placed the record on the turntable and pressed play. The soft crackle filled the room. I made another cup of tea, stood in the doorway, and listened. The music sounded warm, but it didn't hurt anymore. The phone buzzed again. Ethan this time. "Hi, Mom. Natalie said you're home alone. Everything okay?" "I'm fine," I said. "You sure? We'll be busy tomorrow, but we'll call." "That's not necessary." He laughed lightly. "All right. Don't work too hard." "I won't," I said, and ended the call. The folder was still on the counter. I opened it, checked every paper again, and placed them in a neat stack. I added a small note on top. Verified. Then I closed it. The sun was setting when I pulled out the pie crust from the fridge. Apple, Neil's favorite. I mixed cinnamon and sugar, rolled the dough, and placed it in the oven. The smell filled the house. Warm, real, steady. I didn't do it for them. I did it for me. When the timer beeped, I pulled the pie out carefully, set it on the counter, and let it cool. The house felt different now, lighter, like it had already started letting go. I cleaned the counter, wiped every surface, and folded my list in half. Tomorrow at 9. Movers. Pack what's mine, leave the rest. The phone buzzed again. Another message from Natalie. "Don't forget to save us some pie." I smiled. "You won't need it," I whispered. I sat down, poured another cup of tea, and watched the last bit of daylight fade through the window. Somewhere outside, someone was setting up Christmas lights. I could see the flicker of red and gold reflections dancing on the glass. It looked peaceful. I took a small bite of the pie, still warm, and whispered, "Tomorrow it all goes." Then I washed the cup, turned off the light, and stood for a moment in the dark kitchen. The smell of cinnamon hung in the air. It didn't feel like loss. It felt like closure. I looked at the clock one last time. 9 a.m. would come soon. "Tomorrow is fine," I said quietly to myself, the same way I said it on the phone. Then I walked to my room and closed the door behind me. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. The house was quiet, gray light coming through the blinds. I dressed neatly, tied my hair back, and made one last cup of tea. No sugar, no milk, just plain. At 8:45, a truck pulled into the driveway. 2 men stepped out wearing blue shirts with company logos. One of them knocked. "Mrs. Langley?" "Yes," I said. "You're right on time." He looked at his clipboard. "You said 9 a.m., Thanksgiving morning. We wanted to make sure that was correct." "It is," I said. He hesitated. "All right then. What are we moving?" I handed him my short list. "Everything that's mine." He looked at me for a second, like he wasn't sure what that meant, but nodded anyway. "We'll start in the living room." I stood by the window as they worked. The sound of boxes closing, tape tearing, footsteps moving back and forth. It was steady, almost musical. I didn't rush them. I didn't help either. I just watched. They carried out the armchair, the lamp, the dishes, the books, the record player. Every object had weight, but none of it felt heavy. When one of them lifted the photo frame of Natalie's wedding, he paused. "This one too?" I shook my head. "Leave it." He nodded and moved on. By mid-morning, the house was half empty. The echo had returned, bouncing off the walls. For years, that sound would have made me sad. Now it just sounded honest. I walked through each room slowly. The kitchen counters were bare. The living room carpet was rolled up. In Sophie's room, the little nightlight I'd bought was still plugged in. I unplugged it and held it for a moment before placing it in the box. The mover looked up. "That's the last one." I nodded. "Good." He handed me the receipt. "Sign here." I signed my name, steady hand, clear letters. My name. Always mine. They carried the last box to the truck. When I stepped outside, the morning air hit my face, crisp, cold, clean. I breathed it in. It didn't feel like leaving. It felt like finally coming back to myself. As they closed the truck door, one of the movers asked, "Do you want us to lock up?" I shook my head. "No, I'll do it." He smiled politely. "Happy Thanksgiving, ma'am." "You too," I said. They drove away. The truck turned the corner and disappeared. The yard was quiet again. I stood on the porch for a long moment holding my keys. Then I went back inside. The house looked bigger now. Empty walls, empty rooms, empty promises. Everything that mattered was already packed. I walked to the kitchen counter, placed the keys on top, and whispered, "They can keep those." The clock ticked once. Just once. I looked around one last time. The marks on the wall where Sophie had drawn with crayons. The dent on the floor where Neil had dropped his toolbox. The small chip on the cabinet door that Natalie said she'd fix, but never did. I smiled softly. "All yours," I said to the silence. Then I turned off the lights, locked the door, and walked out. The wind caught my coat as I stepped off the porch. The sun was climbing higher, gold over the rooftops. A neighbor waved from across the street. "Happy Thanksgiving, Nora!" I waved back. "You too." I didn't tell her I was leaving. Some goodbyes don't need to be spoken. I reached the car, opened the door, and looked at the house one last time. The curtains moved slightly in the window. Just air, nothing more. For a second, I thought I heard Neil's voice in my head. "You did what you had to do." I smiled. "I know." I started the engine. The radio came on, soft music playing. I turned it down. Silence felt better. As I drove away, the rearview mirror caught the house shrinking behind me. I didn't look twice. At the stop sign, I checked the time. 9:42 a.m., right on schedule. I whispered, "Everything we moved belongs to me." Traffic was light. The streets were empty. Most people were home, carving turkeys, laughing with family. I didn't feel left out. I felt free. Halfway across town, I passed a park where families were setting up picnics. A little girl ran past holding a balloon. For a second, she reminded me of Sophie. I hoped she was happy, wherever she was. The road stretched ahead, clear, open, waiting. I gripped the wheel tighter and said quietly, "That's the last one." I didn't cry. I didn't look back. I just kept driving. When I reached the apartment complex, the manager waved. "Mrs. Langley, right on time." "Yes," I said, smiling faintly. "Always." He pointed to the elevator. "Top floor's ready for you." I nodded. "Thank you." The movers arrived behind me with the truck. They started unloading, careful, efficient. I watched from the hallway as they carried my boxes inside. Everything looked smaller here, but lighter too. When they finished, one of them said, "That's all, ma'am." I handed him the payment envelope. "You've done enough. Thank you." He smiled. "Happy Thanksgiving." "You too," I said. After they left, I closed the door, leaned against it for a second, and let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. The boxes were stacked neatly against the wall. My armchair by the window, My tea set on the counter. My life, condensed but mine. I looked around the new space. Simple, quiet, mine. Outside, fireworks cracked somewhere far away. People were celebrating. I smiled. For the first time in years, Thanksgiving felt peaceful. I sat in my armchair, poured a cup of tea, and whispered, "Everything we moved belongs to me." Then I closed my eyes. The new apartment was quiet, smaller than the house, but peaceful. I set the boxes down one by one. The movers had already left. The air still smelled like cardboard and cinnamon from the pie I'd packed last. I sat on the floor with my tea. Warm, steady. No voices, no footsteps, just my own breathing. For the first time in years, the silence didn't hurt. I unpacked slowly, chair by the window, books on the shelf. Neil's record player on the small table. Everything that was mine, back under my hands again. When I finished, I opened my tablet. I'd installed small cameras in the old house months ago, mostly for security. Or maybe I just didn't trust silence back then. I tapped the screen. The feed came to life. Natalie and Ethan had come home. I watched as their car pulled into the driveway. Natalie stepped out first, holding her phone. Ethan followed with a bag slung over his shoulder. Both looked relaxed, tanned, vacation faces. They opened the front door. Then they froze. "Mom?" Natalie's voice echoed through the hallway. "Mom, are you here?" No answer. She walked into the kitchen. Her hand covered her mouth. "Ethan, where's everything?" He stepped closer to the camera's view. "What do you mean?" She pointed around. "The furniture, the dishes, everything's gone." Ethan frowned, checked the living room, then shouted, "What the hell?" I took a slow sip of tea. The warmth spread down my chest. On screen, Natalie opened a drawer, empty. She looked at Ethan, her voice breaking. "She took it all!" He shook his head. "That's impossible. She wouldn't—" He stopped mid-sentence. His face changed. "She did." I smiled a little. "Finally." Natalie grabbed her phone. "I'm calling her." My phone lit up beside me. I didn't move. It rang once, twice, 3 times, then it stopped. Ethan's voice came through the speaker on the camera. "You don't think she actually—" "I don't know!" Natalie snapped. "She left us with nothing." He paced the floor. "Check the closet. Maybe she just—" She opened it. Empty hangers swung back and forth. I leaned back against the wall and whispered, "You'll learn." Natalie started crying. Ethan walked to the counter, saw the keys I'd left, and slammed his hand down. "Unbelievable." "She took everything!" Natalie shouted. "Not everything," Ethan said bitterly. "She left the bills." They argued for a few seconds, voices rising, blame bouncing back and forth. I didn't turn up the volume. I didn't need to hear the words. The faces said enough. When Natalie finally sat down on the floor, holding her head, Ethan kicked a chair. The noise echoed through my tablet speaker. I finished my tea and said quietly, "That's the sound of ownership." The camera caught Natalie picking up a photo frame from the counter. My handwriting was still on the sticky note I'd left. "All mine." She read it aloud through tears. Then she dropped the frame. I turned off the sound and just watched them move around the house that no longer belonged to them. They looked smaller now, out of place, like guests overstaying a visit. For a moment, I felt something. Maybe guilt, maybe pity. Then I remembered the note they left on Thanksgiving morning. We decided to spend Thanksgiving in Hawaii. Not we asked, not we invited. The memory settled the feeling before it could grow. I took a deep breath, reached over, and muted the tablet completely. The picture still played, but I didn't want to hear their voices anymore. In silence, I watched Natalie sink into a chair. Ethan left the room. The front door slammed. I looked at the cup in my hand. The tea was gone, only the warmth left. I smiled softly. "Finally," I said again. I closed the tablet, slid it into the drawer, and locked it. The room around me was quiet. My kind of quiet. I stood up, walked to the window, and pulled the curtains open. Morning sunlight filled the small space. It looked brighter than it ever did in that big house. My phone buzzed again. 5 missed calls, then 10, then 17. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I made another cup of tea, sat by the window, and whispered, "You left me empty." I returned the favor. The sunlight touched the table, the steam, the edges of my folder stacked neatly beside me. For the first time, I didn't feel like someone's mother or someone's burden. I felt like myself. I turned off my phone, took a slow sip, and whispered to the quiet, "Finally." It was late afternoon when the doorbell rang. 3 sharp knocks followed. Calm, deliberate. I opened the door. A uniformed officer stood there, clipboard in hand. "Mrs. Langley?" "Yes. I'm Officer Raymond. We received a complaint from your daughter about missing property." I stepped aside. "Come in." He walked in slowly, scanning the boxes still stacked near the window. He looked around the small apartment. Everything was neat, quiet, and mine. He said, "She claims you removed items from the house while they were away." "I did," I replied. "Everything I paid for." He looked up from his notepad. "You're saying all of this was purchased by you?" "Yes." I reached for the folder on the table and handed it to him. "Every receipt has my name on it, you can check." He flipped through the pages. Electricity bills, appliance invoices, car registration, my signature on each one. After a minute, he nodded slowly. "You've kept everything organized." "I had time," I said. He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that says you did this right. "I'll make a note of this," he said. "This property belongs to you." A quiet pause filled the room. He closed the folder carefully and returned it to me. "Then it's yours, ma'am," he said. I nodded. "Thank you, officer." As he turned to leave, he looked back once. "You know, most people don't keep records like this." "I learned it from my husband," I said. "Paper doesn't lie." He smiled again and walked out. The door clicked shut behind him. A few minutes later, someone knocked again. Harder this time. "Natalie?" I said quietly, already knowing. The door opened before I finished the sentence. She stood there, eyes red, voice trembling. "How could you do this?" I didn't answer right away. She stepped inside, pointing around the apartment. "You had no right!" "I had every right," I said. My tone was calm, flat. "You took everything." "No," I said. "I took what was mine." She blinked fast. "You made us look stupid. You did that yourselves." Her jaw tightened. "You should have told me." "I did," I said softly. "You just didn't listen." She looked at the folder still on the table. "You called the police?" "No," I said. "You did." She swallowed hard. "They said it's legal, that it's all in your name." "It is." Tears started down her cheeks. "Mom, please, we can fix this." I shook my head. "You can't fix what you decided." "What's that supposed to mean?" "We decided to spend Thanksgiving in Hawaii, remember?" She froze. The color drained from her face. I walked to the counter, poured a cup of tea, and set it in front of her. "You should sit down." She didn't. She just stood there, shaking. "Ethan said you wouldn't do anything crazy." "I didn't," I said. "I followed the law." She covered her face with her hands. "I didn't mean to hurt you." "Yes, you did," I said. "You just didn't think you'd lose." She looked up then, eyes swollen, voice small. "You're really leaving us?" I took a sip of tea. "No," I said. "You already left me." The room went quiet again. She stared at me for a long moment, then turned toward the door. At the doorway, she stopped. "You've changed." I nodded. "No, you just never paid attention before." She stepped out and closed the door. I stood there, listening to her footsteps fade down the hall. The kettle clicked behind me, water still warm. I turned toward the window. The sun was setting. The sky looked almost golden. I whispered, "I had every right." The phone buzzed once. A message from an unknown number. "Officer confirmed you're clear. Case closed." I smiled. "Of course it is." I took the folder, slid it into the drawer, and closed it gently. Everything was in order now, on paper and in truth. Then I sat down, wrapped my hands around the cup, and took another slow sip. The tea was still hot. Outside, the world was quiet again. Click. The door lock turned once. Final. 2 weeks later, a white envelope slid under my door. The return address said, County Court of Savannah. I smiled before I even opened it. Inside, a summons. Grant vs. Langley. Natalie was suing me. I placed the paper flat on the table, poured myself a cup of tea, and whispered, Of course she did. I called the courthouse number listed at the bottom. A woman answered. Good morning, County Clerk's office. This is Mrs. Nora Langley, I said. I'd like to confirm my hearing date. She paused. Ma'am, that's for next Tuesday, 10 a.m. Thank you, I said. I'll be there. The morning of the hearing, I dressed neatly, gray jacket, simple pearl earrings, no makeup, no perfume, just quiet. Outside, the sky was overcast, calm, the kind of morning that keeps people honest. When I arrived, Natalie and Ethan were already there, sitting side by side on the plaintiff's bench. She looked nervous. He looked angry. I sat alone across the aisle. The bailiff called, Case number 24771, Grant versus Langley. The judge entered, gray hair, glasses, tired eyes. Good morning. Let's begin. The lawyer Natalie hired stood up, expensive suit, expensive watch. His tone practiced. Your Honor, my client's mother took property and assets without consent. The judge turned to me. Mrs. Langley? Yes, Your Honor. Do you have a response? I opened my folder, the same one I had shown Officer Raymond. Everything inside was labeled, dated, organized. I handed it to the clerk. Every item they're claiming was purchased and owned by me, I said. Receipts, bank statements, title copies, all attached. The lawyer cleared his throat. Your Honor, that may be, but she removed them without— The judge raised a hand. Let me read first. The room went silent, except for the sound of pages turning. He read for a long minute. Then he set the folder down. Mrs. Langley, he said, everything here shows your name. Yes, sir. He looked at Natalie. Is that correct? She shifted in her seat. I guess so. But it was our home. Legally, he said. It was hers. Ethan leaned forward, whispering something to her. The judge tapped his pen once, sharp. That'll be enough. The lawyer tried again. Your Honor, perhaps there's room for negotiation. The judge shook his head. No negotiation is needed. The ownership is clear. He picked up the gavel. Case dismissed. The sound echoed like a door closing. Natalie gasped softly. Ethan cursed under his breath. I didn't move. The judge looked at me again. Mrs. Langley, you're free to go. Thank you, Your Honor. I stood, gathered my folder, and turned toward the exit. No one followed. Outside, the courthouse steps were cold stone under my shoes. The air smelled faintly of rain. I stopped halfway down and looked up at the sky. For the first time in a long while, I felt weightless, not happy, just free. Behind me, I heard Natalie's voice. Mom, wait! I turned slowly. She was running down the steps, holding her purse like it could save her. Please, she said, breathless. Can we talk? I looked at her for a long moment. About what? About fixing this. There's nothing to fix, I said. Please, don't walk away like this. You did that first. Her eyes filled again. I didn't mean it. We just thought— You thought I'd never stop giving, I said. You were wrong. She flinched, like the words hurt more than they should. Ethan appeared behind her. Come on, Natalie, it's done. He grabbed her arm, but she pulled away. You don't get it, Ethan. She's my mother. I turned back toward the street. Not the way you treated me. She stepped forward once, then stopped. Are you ever going to forgive me? I looked at her calm. Forgiveness isn't the problem. Respect is. Then I walked away. Halfway to the parking lot, I stopped at the bench near the fountain. The sound of water filled the air, steady, simple. I sat down, opened my purse, and pulled out my phone. One missed call from Ruth. I called her back. "Hey, Nora," she said. "How did it go?" "Case dismissed." "I knew it," she said, smiling through the line. "You okay?" "I'm fine." "You sure?" "I didn't cry," I said. She laughed softly. "That's my girl." We hung up. I sat for a while, watching people come and go. Families, lawyers, strangers. None of them knew that inside that courthouse, something invisible had shifted. Justice didn't make a sound. It just settled, quiet and complete. I took a small breath and said out loud, "It's over." When I drove home, the rain finally started. Small drops first, then a steady drizzle. I turned off the radio and let the silence fill the car. At a red light, I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. Calm eyes, no tremor in my hands, just peace. Neil used to tell me, when people take you for granted, let the law speak. I smiled softly. It spoke, Neil, loud enough. By the time I reached the apartment, the storm had passed. I unlocked the door, set the folder back on the table, and poured myself another cup of tea. The steam rose gently, tracing the same pattern as always. I took a sip and whispered, "Case dismissed." I didn't need to say anything else. The world had already heard enough. Then I looked out the window, the city lights flickering against the wet pavement. Everything looked clean again, quiet, honest, free. The days after court felt strangely light. No noise, no demands, no pretending. For the first time in years, my phone didn't ring out of obligation. It stayed still, silent on the counter. Every morning, I made the same routine. Tea at 7, a short walk by 8, then reading until noon. No interruptions, no arguments about bills or chores, just air and space. Ruth stopped by one afternoon with a small plant in her hands. "Thought your windowsill looked empty," she said. "It's peaceful that way," I replied, smiling. She placed the plant near the sunlight anyway. Peaceful doesn't have to mean lonely. "I know," I said softly. "I'm learning that." We sat down for coffee. She asked gently, "Do you miss them?" I stared at the table for a moment before answering. "No," I said. "I miss who I thought they were." Ruth nodded slowly, understanding. "That's harder, isn't it?" "It is," I said, "because that version never existed outside my head." We talked for an hour about her new neighbors, her cat, the book club she wanted me to join. Normal things, simple things. When she left, the room didn't feel empty. It felt settled. That night, I looked around the apartment, my chair by the window, the quiet hum of the fridge, the soft ticking clock. I whispered, "I built this piece myself." I turned off the light, letting the moon spill across the floor. No shadows felt heavy anymore. The next morning, I walked to the local market. The man at the counter knew me by now. "Morning, Mrs. Langley. The usual?" "Yes," I said, "and 1 apple pie." He grinned. "You've earned it." On the way home, I passed a family walking together. A mother held her daughter's hand. The little girl laughed so loud the birds flew from the trees. For a second, I thought of Sophie, her tiny hands, her shy smile. I stopped walking, closed my eyes. "Be happy, sweetheart," I whispered. "That's all I ever wanted." Then I kept walking. At home, I opened the windows and let the fresh air in. I brewed tea, set the cup beside me, and turned on Neil's old record player, Autumn Leaves. The same song he used to play every Thanksgiving morning. The music filled the room, gentle and low. I didn't cry. I didn't ache. It just felt right. The phone buzzed once, an unknown number. I let it ring. Then a text appeared. "Mom, I hope you're okay." I read it twice. Then I placed the phone face down. No reply. Not yet. Some things don't need words. Some lessons need silence. I poured another cup of tea and wrote a small note on the pad next to me. "Peace is proof." The kettle clicked again. I smiled at the sound. Later that afternoon, Ruth called. "I'm making dinner for a few of the ladies tonight," she said. "You should come." "I don't know." "No excuses. It's not Thanksgiving, but it'll feel close enough." I paused, looking around at my quiet kitchen. "All right," I said. "I'll bring dessert." When I hung up, I looked at the clock. 5:30. I had time. I opened the cupboard and pulled out the pie pan. The smell of cinnamon filled the air again. This time, it wasn't for anyone else. It was just for the warmth of doing something right. When the pie finished baking, I set it on the counter to cool. I caught my reflection in the window. Calm, steady, whole. Before leaving, I turned off the lights and whispered to the room, "I'm not alone. I'm just finally with myself." Outside, the sky was pink with sunset, the kind that fades slow, like a quiet promise. As I walked down the hallway, Ruth waved from the end. "You came!" "Of course," I said, holding the pie carefully. "I don't miss dinners anymore." She laughed. "That's the spirit." When we sat together that evening, the table was full of light chatter and soft music. No drama, no tension, just people who showed up because they wanted to. At one point, Ruth poured me more tea and whispered, "Feels good, doesn't it?" "It does," I said. Finally. When I got home later that night, I set the leftover slice on the counter and opened the window again. The city lights blinked below, steady as a heartbeat. I whispered to the dark, "I miss who I thought they were, but I don't miss who they became." Then I smiled, finished my tea, and turned off the light. Thanksgiving came again, exactly 1 year later. This time, I woke up to the same silence, but it wasn't empty anymore. It was peaceful. The air smelled of cinnamon and coffee. The morning light stretched across the small apartment, warm and soft. I stood by the window, watching the leaves fall over the parking lot. The world looked slower now, kinder. A knock on the door broke the quiet. 3 soft taps. "Coming," I said, smiling. When I opened it, Ruth stood there with a grocery bag in her arms. Behind her were Bernard and Louise, the couple from across the hall. They both waved shyly. "Happy Thanksgiving, Nora," Ruth said. "You didn't have to bring anything," I told her. She grinned. "Don't argue. We brought the turkey." I laughed, a real laugh this time. "Then come in before it gets cold." They stepped inside, carrying food, chatter, and the kind of warmth money can't buy. The table I'd once eaten at alone was suddenly alive with plates and hands and stories. As we set everything down, Bernard asked, "You sure you don't want us to say grace?" I shook my head gently. "You go ahead." They bowed their heads. I didn't close my eyes. I just watched. People who meant what they said. People who stayed. When it was my turn to speak, I said quietly, "Thank you for coming." Ruth smiled. "Thank you for inviting us." Bernard raised his glass. "To new traditions." Louise added, "And to good company." We all clinked glasses. The sound was small, but felt bigger than any applause. Halfway through dinner, Bernard noticed the extra setting at the end of the table. "Who's that plate for?" he asked. I smiled. "For forgiveness." Ruth looked at me softly. "For them?" "For me," I said. "Forgiving myself for staying too long, giving too much, and expecting too little." She reached over and touched my hand. "That's a good kind of forgiveness." After dinner, we moved to the small living room. Ruth put on a record, Autumn Leaves, Neil's favorite, the same one that had once filled a much bigger house with loneliness. Tonight it sounded different. Bernard tapped his foot. Louise hummed quietly. Ruth started cleaning up. I sat back with my tea, watching the steam rise. When the song ended, Ruth turned to me. "You okay?" I nodded. "Better than I've been in years." The phone buzzed on the table. I looked down. A message from an unknown number. "Happy Thanksgiving, Mom." No name, but I knew the tone. "Natalie." I stared at the screen for a long moment, then typed 2 words. "You too." Then I set the phone aside. No anger, no ache, just closure. Ruth peeked over my shoulder and smiled. "That felt good, didn't it?" "It did," I said. The night wound down. Bernard and Louise left first, promising to come by next week. Ruth stayed a little longer to pack up leftovers. Before leaving, she said, "Neil would be proud, you know." I looked at the picture frame on the shelf. Neil in his old jacket, smiling like he knew the ending all along. After she left, I washed the last glass, wiped the table, and blew out the candle. The apartment fell into quiet again, but it wasn't lonely this time. It was earned. I poured myself one last cup of tea and walked to the window. Outside, the lights from other apartments flickered, families laughing, televisions glowing. I looked at the empty plate still sitting there and whispered, "For forgiveness." Then I turned to Neil's photo. "We did fine." The words came out calm, steady, final. I sat down in my chair, the same one I'd moved with me a year ago. The tea was warm, the air still. I closed my eyes for a moment and listened. Not for voices, not for footsteps, just for the small sound of peace. Outside, a few snowflakes drifted down, catching the glow of the streetlight. I smiled. "This year," I said softly, "I woke up to an empty house again, but this time, it's mine." Then I took a slow sip of tea and let the silence stay. And that was my story. A year ago, I woke up to an empty house and thought I'd lost everything. But now I know. Peace isn't something people give you. It's something you choose. If you stayed until the end, thank you for sharing this quiet moment with me. Your time means more than you know. If this story touched you, don't forget to subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. I always read every comment. Until next time, take care of yourself, stay strong, and remember, sometimes silence is the loudest justice of all.